On this edition of Defense News Weekly, a new day dawns for power projection in the Pacific. We sit down with Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin and hear directly from congressional leaders, with in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis. This is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. The Navy has revealed another round of discipline after two collisions involving 7th Fleet destroyers in the Pacific last year. Vice Admiral Thomas Rowden, the commander of Naval Surface Forces, will step down, and the former captains of the USS Fitzgerald and USS John McCain have been charged with negligent homicide in the deaths of 17 sailors on board the two ships. In addition, 3 junior officers on the Fitzgerald and 1 Chief Petty Officer on the McCain were charged. Last year, the U.S. Pacific Fleet commander announced his retirement, and the commander of 7th Fleet was fired, and multiple other commanders have been relieved since the incidents. Over the past 2 weeks, the Air Force has deployed bombers across the globe from England to Guam. The Air Force says the deployments are to help build readiness and demonstrate power projection. B-2 Spirit bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, and B-52 bombers from Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, deployed to Guam, while B-52 bombers from Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, deployed to Royal Air Force Fairford in the United Kingdom. Both locations have been standard basing sites for deployments in the past. The Air Force has not said exactly how long these deployments will last. A draft of the Trump administration nuclear posture review has leaked to the Huffington Post, and there are some interesting revelations. First, the Pentagon could develop new, lower-yield weapons and could eventually create a new cruise missile-based delivery system, which is currently banned by a treaty with Russia. It is important to note that the Pentagon has not confirmed the authenticity of the draft, and it is likely that the final product, expected to be released soon, could be vastly different from this document. Several Army units are set to deploy later this year, according to a recent release. 2 of them to areas where the United States is continuing to project power. The 1st Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division from Fort Hood, Texas, will head to Europe, while the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division from Fort Stewart, Georgia, is headed to Korea. In addition, the 1st Security Assistance Brigade from Fort Benning, Georgia, will make its first ever deployment to Afghanistan to train Afghan national security forces.
Liftoff. And we have liftoff. Engine cooling water activated. Tower clear.
What you're seeing is the launch of a classified National Reconnaissance Office payload aboard a United Launch Alliance Delta IV medium rocket. The launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California was a success, and the 124th successful launch by rocket maker ULA. No details were released about what exactly was being launched. Recently, cell phones across Hawaii got an alert no one wanted to receive. The notification said a ballistic missile threat was inbound to Hawaii, but it was a false alarm. With North Korean tensions rising, the false alert triggered a firestorm of criticism. But on the military side, questions are circulating about what ballistic missile defense assets could defend Hawaii. Beyond whatever naval ships might be in Pearl Harbor and an Aegis Ashore test site on Kauai, the islands are virtually defenseless, something that we'll be sure to see debate in coming weeks. The next generation of Marine Corps aviation in the Pacific has arrived as the USS Wasp has made port in Japan. The Wasp, which is capable of carrying F-35B fighters, will replace the USS Bonhomme Richard, which will return to the United States. What makes this a big deal is that now Marine F-35s based in Japan can embark on the Wasp, which they could not do on the Bonhomme Richard. The Wasp's captain says the crew is ready to go and has been preparing for this deployment for a long time.
The crew is very excited to have finally arrived in Sasebo, Japan, after a long transit to get here and after several years of planning to make this a reality. Now that we are in Sasebo, we will begin by conducting some maintenance and training and assessment period in preparation for the ship's first patrol in the region.
The Wasp is one of the Navy's amphibious assault ships, meaning it helps deploy Marines and their equipment all over the world. But there is debate over how many the Navy needs. Currently, there are 31 in service, but Marine Corps leaders say they need 38. At the recent Service Navy Association meeting in Arlington, Virginia, we caught up with an advocacy group trying to raise awareness about the need for more ships.
Very generous in funding the construction of amphibious warships, but unfortunately, what's important to the efficiency of building these ships, important to the Marine Corps, is a commitment for a long-term construction plan for amphibious warships that will get us to the 38 that the country needs. What we need is a commitment from Congress for a series of amphibious warship constructions, and not just the one-offs that we've been getting recently.
Right now, the Navy's guided missile cruisers and destroyers are equipped with the older SPY-1 Aegis Defense System, but a new solution is on the way. At the Surface Navy Association's meeting, I got an update from Raytheon on the next generation replacement. Sir, thanks for taking the time to chat with us. So where does the Air and Missile Defense Raider SPY-6 currently stand?
Well, we've had a very exciting last 18 months. June of 2016, we delivered our engineering development system out to Kauai, the Pacific Missile Range facility in Hawaii. By August of 2016, we had it up to full power operate. And by October of 2016, we were running, we did our first satellite track. November of 2016, we did our first integrated air missile defense tracking. That was tracking satellites and aircraft in the area. By February of 2017, we did our first ballistic missile track. And then by March of 2017, we did our first ballistic missile defense mission, where we actually acquired, tracked, and discriminated the target.
Where does that put the program and what needs to be done?
Well, that actually, all those tasks led the program to a successful milestone C in April of 2017. So that was the gate to allow for low-rate initial production. And following that April milestone C, there was the award of the 3-ship option for the first 3 DDG Flight 3 mission equipment for SPY-6 radar.
That's great. So how did, you mentioned the test in Hawaii and everything like that, but how is Air and Missile Defense Radar going to factor in with Aegis Baseline 10 that's coming out and other combat systems on these ships?
So after, and we still have a little bit more excitement after that. So after, come July of this year, we actually did a complex BMD target. And then in September of this, which would be last year, 2017, we did a complex ballistic missile defense target. Plus, we also did integrated, as part of the integrated air missile defense mission, we did simultaneous with that BMD target, anti-ship cruise missiles. So going from now, we're now focused. In December, we finished our last big system engineering technical review. We did 4 technical review elements, which are basically closing out the engineering, manufacturing, development phase. And now our focus is on combat systems engineering, though we say focus is on, but we've been working with Lockheed Martin on the combat systems engineering now since the beginning of the program, with the start of the Combat System Integration Working Group, delivering an emulator to Lockheed Martin, which is the full tactical back end, and we're delivering more emulators to them this coming year. So our primary focus is baseline 10 integration and also waterfront integration of the DDG Flight 3 destroyer.
That's great. So another question I have when I look at this program is scalability and the possibility of this type of radar being put on a smaller FFG-X type ship. Would that be something that's possible and something that you guys are thinking about?
Not only were we thinking about it, but the Navy was thinking about it. So in the RFP in the very beginning back in 2009 during the concept phase, and one of the critical technology elements was to prove scalability in the technology development phase back in 2009, 2010. So we build our radar based on our radar modular assembly. It's about a 2-foot by 2-foot by 2-foot building block, which in itself is a standalone radar. And when time and phase synchronized with other building blocks of this radar, you can build up any size radar aperture. We like to think of it as scaling up to the next size radar. Since after AMDR was awarded, there was a competition for the Enterprise Air Surveillance Radar, or EASR, which is Raytheon won that contract, and that was a 9 RMA approach, scaling a radar that's roughly 6 by 6 in size of the array, but with the same sensitivity of a SPY-1 radar in today's fleet.
Wow. So finally, kind of as we finish up, looking at all this, it's pretty neat to work on, I bet, with all the different things going on.
Exceptionally.
And working with these challenges has to be something that makes you wake up every day and go, wow, this is cool.
Been at Raytheon 40 years. Best program I've ever worked.
All right, Ted, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. There's ongoing debate right now about both the size and capability of the Navy. Defense News naval warfare reporter David Larder caught up with 2 members of Congress to get their take on the state of the Navy.
Well, I think my concerns go beyond the Navy, and I think Congress also needs to look at itself in this regard. But it just occurs to me a year into my first term in Congress that those of us who very much want to get to 355 ships and give the Navy the resources it needs to get there are failing to make a persuasive case. And I do think, at least what we've read in terms of certain guidance going from OSD throughout all the services, is to be more tight-lipped about what the future fleet looks like. And I think, notwithstanding the, of course we need to have some protections for advanced capabilities, in terms of the broad case for the number and where the fleet should go, I think that's something the Navy should be shouting from the rooftops, as well as making a more persuasive case for what that fleet will do, and then having a grassroots effort to help people like me and those of us in Congress who want to give the Navy the resources it needs to actually get there.
So the budget for 18 is still sitting in SAC-D. I'm wondering what the outlook is and the prospect is for a deal in the early part of this year, as where you sit in HACS.
Well, I think it has to happen. I think that we have done too many CRs. CRs are the worst way to budget. These things have to happen. I think they will happen. I'm the eternal optimist. I do think that things that have happened yesterday have given us some hope that both sides can have a conversation. They can clear the table of some other issues that I think are trying to be held as part of the appropriations negotiations. But these things have to get done. We cannot have another CR. Another CR would be tremendously harmful for our military, create even more uncertainty. So these things have to get done. I'm hopeful that there's the will for these things to get done in the next several weeks so we avoid another continuing resolution.
Well, I'm very hopeful that by the time the continuing resolution runs out on the 19th, we will have come up with a BCA deal to bust the caps and at least give the military broadly and the Navy in particular some certainty over the next 2 years. But obviously, even that, the BCA will still be in effect for 2 more years after that. The right thing to do would be just to get rid of the BCA and go back to the process of appropriating 12 separate bills. That doesn't seem likely, so we're stuck in this situation where we know we need 60 votes in the Senate. That's going to require defense hawks like me to swallow some non-defense spending. I'm open to having that conversation with my colleagues on the other side, and I just would hope that they stop holding the Defense Department hostage for the sake of domestic spending, because we've seen the tragic consequences of that play out. It's getting worse and worse, and obviously CRs, as you know, are incredibly inefficient. The Navy has wasted something like $4 billion as a result of CRs, and I think that needs to stop. So hopefully we'll fix that in the next week. Hope springs eternal.
So what are you looking for in terms of the Navy's budget submission in 2019, which we understand is coming in February?
Well, we have to do our job this year. We've already done it on authorization at 13 ships. We have to make sure we appropriate to fund 13 ships, and that has to be the baseline for the Navy going forward. And in my mind, they have to next year propose to build more ships than 13. Certainly no less than 13. I think those things have to happen. I think that sends the signal to the Navy in making sure that we appropriate to 13 ships, gives them the demand signal, gives the industry the demand signal, and it shows that we are serious in getting to the 355-ship Navy.
When you're communicating with your colleagues on the Republican side that maybe tend towards the fiscal hawk side of things, what are you saying to try and convince them of the necessity to sort of increase the defense budget as the HACS is authorized?
A few things. I mean, one, from just a constitutional perspective, this is sort of our only mandatory function, right, to provide for the common defense, and I do think it should be our first responsibility, because if we don't get it right, then all these other arguments about, how we fund entitlement spending or what we're spending on Meals on Wheels become academic, right? In a very dangerous world in which we allow U.S. leadership to crumble, we're not going to have the luxury of solving some of this stuff peacefully at home. Two, if you look at the numbers, in real terms, since 2011, the Pentagon suffered a 22% cut. At the same time, the world has not gotten 22% safer. At the same time, our adversaries are doubling down on their investments. China in particular, but even Russia, which is suffering from a weak economy, is making investments in the military and running roughshod over our red lines across the region. And then third, if you look at the budgetary picture broadly, you're left with the inescapable conclusion that if you care about the debt, if you really care about what's driving up our debt, then you have to be willing to have a conversation about mandatory spending. You could get rid of the Pentagon entirely. It might help slow the growth in the debt, but the big picture is that mandatory spending is crowding out all our priorities. And so if we don't address that, it's going to be increasingly hard to make the case for the military or all the domestic programs that my Democratic colleagues want to protect.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also be sure to add us on Apple News and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, we sit down with Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin and get a sneak peek at the latest in Air Force innovation.
Today's program is provided in part by Raytheon, proud partner of FifthDomain.com, the sister site of Defense News, dedicated to all things cyber. Learn more at FifthDomain.com.
Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. One of the main themes at recent Air Force events has been innovation, and the service recently hosted a grand opening for its newest initiative, AFWorks, at Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas. Reporting directly to the Air Force's Vice Chief of Staff, the organization will help pioneer innovation in all that the service does. And the opening event had a pair of special guests, Vice President Mike Pence and Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson.
The President sent me here today to celebrate this grand opening of the first in the nation AFWorks facility, and to thank all of you for your commitment to the United States Air Force and to working in collaboration with all of the great military personnel in this room and all who will work in concert with you.
And all of us know that the pace of change is accelerating, and the Air Force has to engage the next generation of innovators, young scientists and engineers and smart business people, to take us into our future.
Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin is the first non-veteran to head the VA. But Shulkin is no stranger to the department. He served as Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs for Health in the Obama administration. The Secretary brings a hands-on approach to rehabilitating the department and the department's image. Military Times' Leo Shane sat down with him to see what's next for the VA. Here's a portion of that interview.
Listen, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for sitting down with us. Wanted to start with just a look back at the last year, how you think VA has done. We heard from President Trump a couple days ago that he thinks the VA has made the greatest strides that it's made in decades. How would you assess your first year on the job and what VA is now compared to a year ago?
Well, I'm a critical grader, Leo, and I generally tend to be impatient. And I really want to make major changes for this organization because I believe it's essential that we get this system right and we get it right quickly. So I tend to wish that we had accomplished more than we have. Having said that, I am proud that with the Congress and with the President, we've gotten 9 major pieces of legislation through, all of which I think are making big improvements for veterans. We've set 5 major priorities that I know that we're making progress on, but we have much more work to do, and we have many areas that are going to take years to put in permanent solutions for. So I want to make sure that every day that I come to work that we're making progress and that we're overcoming barriers and that we are fulfilling the mission that's so important for us to do. But we have a lot of work to do at this organization. Is
it a different VA than a year ago, and does it need to be a different VA? There was a lot of talk from candidate Trump about the failings of VA, and we've discussed some of that. But he and the department have emphasized that things are changing, some of the culture. So do you feel like it's a different VA than this time last year?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think that any organization as large as ours goes through a transition where certain people in the organization, leadership and staff, have to make that decision whether this is a new day or not. And I think that we clearly are every day getting more people excited about what the opportunity is and taking the challenge of transforming the VA. And we have many others that we haven't yet convinced and are still sitting on the sideline waiting to see if this is sustainable and if there's enough evidence to really declare it a new day or not. And so I never expected that you could snap your fingers and make 350,000 people convinced that things were different, particularly when so many people who work in the VA have seen so many different secretaries come and go. But when you start putting in place initiatives that can't be ripped out, when you start putting in place systems that will modernize the VA and those will be sustainable, I think that's when people begin to believe that things are different.
So what would you point to then if I'm a veteran who's used the system and I say, gee, over the last year, it seems like they've talked a lot about changes, but I haven't really seen it. What would you point to say this is something that underlying has fundamentally changed?
Well, I would say a couple things that I think are part of the evidence that somebody might conclude that this is a new VA. One is our commitment to transparency. We now post our wait times. We now post our satisfaction scores. We now post our disciplinary actions. In the very near future, we're going to be the first health system in the country that's going to post our opioid use rates. When you begin to start disclosing and publicly sharing information, it's very hard to stop that. So that's a commitment that I believe is going to be at VA for a long time, and that's part of what we need to do to transform this organization to regain the trust of those that we serve, our veterans. Secondly, I think the accountability bill has set a new tone, that we are resetting the standards of what it means to be able to work and serve veterans in the VA, and that there are certain behaviors that may have been tolerated in the past that we're just not going to tolerate. Third, when you make decisions like you're going to replace your electronic medical record, and you're going to change a decision that's been around now for 35 years, but you're moving towards a more modern concept of interoperability, a more modern concept of maintenance of technology that's rapidly advancing, that's a decision that once that's in place, that's going to be hard to reverse probably for decades. And so those are areas that I think are a big deal. The last one, of course, would be our view about integrating in with the private sector and community care and setting a direction that really is now building choice into the permanent part of the way that we operate VA.
To see the rest of our interview with the Secretary, go to militarytimes.com. And don't go away. When we come back, find out how to improvise a lock when you don't have one. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. On this week's Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her tips on what to know when you sign a lease.
Uniform inspections require attention to detail, a skill that translates to all aspects of civilian life. And when it comes to leasing a car, nothing could be more important than attention to those details. Leasing can offer some attractive monthly payments, but you should understand how a lease works before you sign on the dotted line. Leasing is different than ownership. You're not paying on a loan towards owning the car. You're actually only paying for using the car over a period of time. A typical lease term is 3 years, but you can go up to 5. Most leases put restrictions on mileage, meaning driving over a certain limit will result in fees, sometimes as low as 10,000 miles a year. So you'll have to be mindful of how you're using your car when leasing. If you lease a car and then decide it's not for you, you could also face early termination fees. Something to keep in mind if your lifestyle changes frequently. You don't want to end up spending more on the car than you intended or that you can afford. If you're still unsure, work with your financial institution to see whether buying or leasing makes sense for your budget.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And when we come back, find out how to improvise a lock when you don't have one. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Most doors have locks, but sometimes you need to create one. In this edition of Deadly Skills, retired Navy SEAL Clint Emerson explains his way of doing just that.
100 Deadly Skills, book number 2, skill number 57, create a door closer lock. You have an auto door closing arm. These are on a lot of commercial buildings. You can use these by clamping down the two arms together to prevent the door from opening. Items that'll do that are the belts off your waist, messenger bag straps, and purse straps. This is how you do it. First, you want to go ahead and guide the bitter end up through the buckle on the arm that's actually bolted to the wall or the door frame. Okay, you want to button it in there nice and close. Lock it down, and then it's as simple as wrapping the remaining part of the belt around that arm as tight as you can. And the idea is to prevent this arm or this door from opening at all. As you start to get less slack, you want to feed it in behind and weave it down through the center to keep the strap in place and closest to the wall. Nice and tight. and do it one more time. There you go. Now we're gonna test it. It's gonna give a little, but not all the way, and it's enough to keep a bad guy out.
That's all we have time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.